It was a lot of fun. And yeah, we're talking about that first game right now that I was actually in attendance for. That was number 1 Georgia going down to the wire with Kentucky, winning that game 13-12. I actually went with Mitch Kaiser. Also does a lot of content here for the college side here at PFF. And Dalton, full transparency, we were like, okay, end of third quarter, let's get out of here, beat the traffic, let's get home. We had to stay the whole game. We were like, we can't leave now. This might be the biggest win in Kentucky history, and of course, Georgia ended up pulling it out at the end, but it was a really close game that, of course, we'll dive into all the grades and all the numbers in just a second, but yeah, it was a really close game, Dawn, and Kentucky had them on the wire, honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, that's how Kentucky's going to win ball games, is getting in those ugly defensive games, right? And it's only just, it's just as shocking because we saw they played against South Carolina last week, and you figure, okay, well, obviously Georgia's better than South Carolina. This should be handled the same way they handled them last year, right? They beat them, by 40-something or 50 last year, and we were figuring the same thing was coming, and you know what? It just shows you, again, any given day, especially in college football, when all of a sudden you get college kids who maybe execute at a little bit lower level, or they fall into – we've seen plenty of teams fall asleep a little bit in some of these early season games and get into closer games than they thought they would be in. I think that's the case for Georgia last night, but they escaped with a win, and that's all that matters.
That's all that matters. Let's go over the grades from this Georgia-Kentucky game, starting with the Georgia Bulldogs. Edge defender Chaz Chambliss was the highest graded player at 84.3. Jared Wilson at 79.1. Julian Humphrey at a 77.8. Jalen Walker at a 76.1. And Dylan Fairchild at a 76. And then we'll go over to the Kentucky side of the ball. Zion Childress was the highest graded player at a 73.8. JQ Hardaway at a 73.5. Ty Bryant at a 71.9. Demi Sumo Karngbe at a 71.5. And De'Aric Jackson at a 68.7. Dawn, I know you were already able to watch this because you were driving home from Chicago, but when you dove into the tape at about 4 o'clock this morning, what stood out to you? What was the stat that really told the story in this game?
Well, a couple of things. You see all the defensive players and the highest graded players. There was obviously a very defensive game, a physical game, and both teams really struggled to make explosive plays, right? But I think the one thing that stood out to me, and this is going to sound like a good stat on the surface, but it's something that's starting to worry me a little bit. So Carson Beck last night had a 92.2 play action grade, okay? And what we're seeing, though, from Georgia's passing game is they're not able to just drop back in a standard drop back and throw the football right now. You're getting just play action, run game. Obviously, they have 3 really good backs who are just dynamic in the run game behind a really good offensive line. But for the year right now, Carson Beck has a 90.6 play action grade and a 61.3 non-play action grade.
Wow.
So they are struggling right now. And look, Dominic Lovett was really their only big-time receiver last night. Other guys are struggling to get going. They're struggling to get the tight ends going, and we thought they had a lot of talent at tight end. You're getting a team right now that's struggling to drop back and throw the football without play action. So that right now they're relying on the run game, which is fine. They have a great run game and 3 great backs. But the play action game is all they have right now, and that's nothing against Carson Beck necessarily. They're just unable to create. I think it's their weapons right now aren't playing up to the level maybe that they're capable of. You're just seeing in the drop back game, it's just not all the way there, right? And obviously Beck doesn't add a whole lot with his legs, usually 1 or 2 first downs a game. So they're one of those teams that needs to be ahead of schedule with the run game, and then get into the play action. And it's kind of been a trend, not just through this game, through the first 3 games.
The fact that Georgia, out of any team in the country, has to be ahead of schedule when they have Carson Beck at quarterback. That's crazy. It's like if there's any quarterback you think, oh, he could drop back and we're fine. It is Carson Beck, but you're right. It really didn't look great yesterday. I will say that the Kentucky defense is outstanding. We said that preseason, and it proved that in that game. But yeah, a little scary for Georgia right now that, hey, you're what we think is the best quarterback in the country is in standard dropbacks doing okay right now. And I don't think it's completely his fault. I think a lot of it has to do with those weapons, but that was pretty interesting. Dalton, one big reason why Georgia was able to escape with this victory, they got after Brock Vandagriff in this game. They had a 43.2% pressure rate in this game. They pressured him 23 times in this game. You saw Jalen Walker, one of the highest graded players. He was all in the backfield the entire night. He had 7 pressures in this game. Tyrion Ingram Dawkins had 5 pressures. Gabe Harris had 4 pressures. And remember, Michael Williams is still out. So the guy that everyone thinks could be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, he's still not playing, and Georgia's defensive line was still dominating out there. Vandagriff, under pressure yesterday, had a 40.8 passing grade. He was 5 for 15 for 49 yards, 2 turnover-worthy plays, and he took 3 sacks as well. It just completely stalled that Kentucky offense. They just couldn't block. And this is an issue for the Wildcats because last week, remember, South Carolina had a 59% pressure rate against Kentucky, and they weren't even blitzing that much. So you got Georgia's defensive line dominating Kentucky. South Carolina's D-line dominating Kentucky. I understand those are two of the best D-lines in the country, but at the same time, this is a major issue for this Kentucky offense right now.
Yeah, it is. We've seen it now 2 weeks in a row, and it really extends back to last year when they had a subpar offensive line too. And my most impressive guy, you just mentioned Jalen Walker. You're right. He was all over the place. Whether it was off the edge or as a stand-up linebacker blitzing, he was just terrific. A 90.9 pass rush grade, the 7 pressures you mentioned, just under a 39% pass rush win rate, and a batted pass to go with it. He was spectacular. He was a big reason. Him blitzing from different spots is really, you can see Kirby Smart likes to take advantage of Walker's versatility. And look, this pass rush, that may be a better pass rush last night than we saw at any point last year. Because last year, that was kind of the weakest part of their defense. So if they're going to look like that in the pass rush, well, they can get in some of these more low-scoring games. I just worry about them with Carson Beck and the passing game kind of the way it is right now, relying so much on play action. I have to wonder what happens now when they play Texas or Ole Miss and maybe they get into some of these higher scoring games. Obviously, we saw them put up, 34 points against Clemson, but it's a very slow grind. They only had, 6 points in the first half of that game. So their passing game needs to put something together. I don't think there's any issue with Beck. I think the weapons just need to step up and start getting open.
Yeah, my most impressive part of the game was the Georgia interior offensive line. This was a tough test for them going up against Deion Walker, who we interviewed. Check out the interview, by the way. Awesome guy. Probably going to be a first-round pick in the draft, right? And we had him as the second-best D tackle in the country, one of the biggest freak athletes in college football. He's 330 pounds, and he said to me that he could run a 4.6 in the 40. That's outrageous. He didn't do anything in this game. He had a 54.6 grade, 0 pressures in this game. Georgia's interior line had an 85.5 grade in this game, 84.8 run blocking grade, and 0 pressures allowed on the interior on 27 pass blocking snaps. And Dalton, the craziest part about all of that, Tate Ratledge, the best guard in college football, went down with what looked like a serious injury with 10 minutes left in the second quarter. So basically the entire game, they were playing without their superstar offensive guard, and yet Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson, and Micah Morris held it down against one of the best D tackles in the country, even when your leader and your best offensive player goes down with an injury. I was so impressed by specifically Micah Morris coming in as a backup and still was lights out against a great D tackle in Deion Walker. So that Georgia interior line, give them all the flowers. They were outstanding against Kentucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to need that to continue, right? Carson Beck's a classic pocket quarterback, and if they still have that elite pass protection even without Ratledge for some period of time, that's a huge help, especially when you're trying to figure out everything else in the passing game. A clean pocket's a quarterback's best friend.
So, Dalton, before we move on, real quick, are you worried about Georgia, or is this kind of like a flukish game for you?
No, I think we saw a little bit of this early last year from them. I think was it the Auburn game early in the year, and I think the South Carolina game too, where it was just they were figuring this. They go through this period where they're figuring themselves out on offense, and I think they're going to start leaning more and more into this running game, possibly more than they did last year, because you've just got 3 monster backs back there between Etienne and Frazier and Robinson. I mean, I don't know if any teams in the country have 3 better backs than that.